Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. Today's episode we're going to check out the Kessil A500x. Alright, thank you for joining me on another episode of Parker's Reefs, and today we're going to look at the two Kessil A500x I've had on my tank now for about 6 or 7 weeks. I feel like it's been long enough now that I can give you my honest opinion on these lights. We've got them installed up here with my 3 Philips Coral Cares and also 3 Kessil A360x plus 4 Reflector light bars. And yes, before we go any further, I do know I didn't need to add them for any extra light, but I was bored in lockdown. Kessil makes some really juicy lights and they came out with these new powerhouses. I couldn't help but test them out, and I figured I may as well share my opinion on the lights with you guys at home. So I think we might start things off with an unboxing. I'll then show you how I went about mounting them. Then I'll show you what they look like above the tank because it's kind of important. And then last but not least, we'll wrap things up with a little bit of a summary. So let's dive on into it. Alright, here we are with one of the 2 Kessil A500x that I bought. You can see I've got the tuna blue version, and we can see here that this has got natural shimmer, it's compact and robust, full spectrum, perfect color mixing using their latest patented dense matrix array, and it has strong penetration, which I'll resist all temptation to channel the inner adolescent in me, but let's flip this box over and see what else there is. You can see it uses the same mounting options that their other lights do, and that's because it's mostly got basically the same form factor. It's possibly a little bit bigger, and you can see here that they mention that it is good for up to or greater than 3 feet deep aquariums, which is quite a claim. You see here we've got some power consumption, 185 watts max, which is quite a lot for a small LED, and it uses a 48 volt power supply, which differs a little from their other lights. You can see here we've got the Australian version because, surprise, surprise, I am in Australia. Let's rip this box open and see what is inside. Alright, we can open this up here, and the little lid on the top's got a few bits and pieces there. We got some stickers, we got some warranty information with a QR code, and looks like a quick start guide. To be honest, the Kessils are fairly simple to get going. You shouldn't need anything like that. The dongle's a little complicated, but even the K-Link and the K-Link controller are pretty straightforward. Open this up, we'll see we've got the light itself, we've got this reflector here. I did also pick up one of the super narrow 35-degree reflectors, so we'll be able to test both, well, all 3, no reflector, the standard reflector and the narrow reflector. We get the Australian power lead, which fairly standard operation there. We get the included mounting hardware. We'll use something a little bit different. I'll show you how I mount these lights in a moment, but all that stuff's there included. Got this gigantic power supply. This is a meanwhile 48 volt power supply. This guy is going to chew a bit of power, but that's okay. We've got a good quality power supply, plenty of weight to it. I'll have to find somewhere to mount that, but you know, so be it. And then of course, last but not least is the A500x itself. And if this looks a little bit similar to the A360x, that's because it does. It's the same form factor. In fact, it just looks like a A360x on steroids. It's got the intensity and the color lights on top. It's got a little bit more airspace around it for breathing. I'm assuming this is probably very similar matrix to the A360x, that they pump some extra voltage through and therefore require some extra cooling. But all in all, it's still a very small form factor LED. That's all you get. Let's have a look at how I went about mounting these fixtures up. Okay, now much like the A360x, it comes with these included mounting options. I'm not a huge fan of those. In fact, I like to use a loc-line to mount it to my 80/20 light frame. I've got a little off-cut of it here to show you how the concept works, and I've got my loc-line here. Now, obviously I need to attach this to both of those pieces, so I've got some mounting plates that I use on each end, and a little either an elbow or a Y piece with some knuckles like I have here. You will also need a double adapter. I'll put a link to all of the parts down in the description. Plus there's also a separate video on it if you wanted to check that out. But essentially you grab a 5mm bolt, you screw that onto the top of the Kessil here. Don't do it up too tight, it doesn't need to be tight. There are some electronics underneath that bolt, so try not to break through those. but tight enough that it's not going to fall off. Clip your elbow or Y piece on there. You've got your knuckles, then a double adapter, and then another mounting plate which is going to screw onto your 80-20, and effectively you're done. You've now got yourself an adjustable mount for your Kessil A360X or A500X. Now, talking about finances of this light, and I did mention how expensive they are, it does not come with any of the Kessil K-Link cables, which are an extra $40 each. So if you're looking to mount a couple of these up, you're going to have to budget that in. Or if you can do like I did here, I popped down to my local Kmart and picked up this USB-C to USB-C cable, considerably cheaper, and as I found out doing this video, works exactly the same. All right, now that the lights are actually mounted, let's have a look at what they look like on the lighting frame. Just pop open the hood. And jump up on a step so we can have a look. I've got the lights down a little bit lower so you can get a good visual of them. You can see the A360X here that have been mounted previously using the same technique to the 80-20 frame here, which gives me the ability to just point them specifically at any sort of coral or bommy that I want, and can angle them up and down, left to right, do whatever you want. The installation for the A500X does allow something a little bit sort of similar, but I guess it is a bit more rigid because we're between a pretty tight fixture here, but it does give me the ability to raise and lower them a little bit as well as angle them where I want. But realistically, it was just an easy way to mount them, mounting onto the back of the 80-20 frame there and then just popping them in there. I've done the same for the one over that side, but I had to use the Y piece rather than the elbow because I only had one elbow, but it all worked a treat. As you can see, I've used the combination of the official Kessil cables as well as the Kmart versions. They're all working fine in conjunction with the A360X and the A500X, all working a treat. I do need to do a little bit of cable management up here, not that you see it all that often. Very rarely are you above the light frame like we are at the moment, but things are getting a little messy up there, and I don't really like that. When you're down here, it's not so visible. In fact, it's pretty tidy, but still, I know it's there, so I've got to tidy it up. All right, this is with one A500X Kessil mounted 1 foot above the water surface on my 2.1 meter long tank. Now, it's probably a pretty unfair test because you're not going to run one of these fixtures over a tank this size, but it does give you an idea of the sort of amount of area it covers. I'll test the power of this in a second, but it's kind of fair to say that the light is mounted a third of the way into the tank. In fact, yeah, pretty much spot on. We're talking 70 centimeters in from the edge of the tank, and then the next one's 70 centimeters across. So it's exactly a third of the way in, and we're still getting, this is with no reflector installed, mind you, we're still getting reasonable light down to this base here and definitely into halfway across the tank here. When we turn the second one on, that would fill that light in, and I'll show you that in a second. So that's now with the tank lit up just with the two A500X, and whilst I wouldn't say it's adequate lighting to keep this tank long term, if you just needed to get some shimmer and you needed some light in your tank, it would work. In comparison probably to two Philips Coral Cares, probably not, and we're talking similar sort of price range for these lights, but you can't argue with the shimmer. And again, this is without any of the reflectors on. What I'll do now is I'll turn the second one off so we've just got one light to work with. Then I'll go through the different reflector options, including, like we've got at the moment, no reflector, the standard included reflector, and then the narrow 35-degree reflector. So let me disconnect this second one and we'll get the par meter out. All right, we've got the one Kessil A500X connected now, and I'm going to measure 3 points under the light directly. I'm going to do at the base about near the top of my rockscape and then just below the surface of the water. Again, this is with the light mounted 1 foot above the water surface. All right, with no reflector installed, I was getting 60 par on the base of the tank, which is a solid 750 mil down, plus the 1 foot above that. Coming up to the top of my rockwork, which is approximately halfway down my tank, it's getting 120 par, and then right up a couple of inches below the surface, I was getting 180 par. Not bad from one light, I have to admit, but that is directly under that Kessil. All right, with the normal included reflector installed, let's see how those measurements change. All right, with that standard reflector installed, directly under the light again, we bumped our readings up to 120 par at the base of my tank, up to a 210 near the top of my rockwork, which is about halfway through my tank, and then a couple of inches below the surface up to 330. I'm going to install this behemoth of a narrow reflector on it now, and then we'll see how the Kessil looks then. Instantly you can see how narrow that reflector is. Wow, the beam is so narrow. I'll measure the par and then we'll lift the lights up just to see how far I can go above the surface with the narrow reflector on. I think that's where these reflectors really come into their element, is when you need to mount these lights very high above a tank. But let's measure the par. All right, with that narrow reflector installed with the light mounted 1 foot above my tank, I was able to get a par of 170 on the floor, 400 just near the middle point of my tank, and 600 a couple of inches below the water surface. So it really does put quite a narrow spotlight on the tank. In fact, let's lift the light frame up now and just see how far above the tank we can go. If I lift my lights up as high as they'll go, you can see we've still got quite a narrow path there. In fact, with the light about 20 inches above the tank, I guess the spread now comes into about the 80 centimeter mark. A bit of a 80 centimeter spotlight with the light mounted that far above it, but you can see the drop off is drastic. Where we go from having light there, we have absolutely no light there. It's very narrow. But again, would be really useful on one of those niche install applications. All right, enough of the testing of the singular Kessil A500. I guess what most people want to know is, what did my tank look like before I added the Kessil A500s, and what it looks like after I added the A500s. So I'm going to go power everything else back up and we'll have a look at it from there. All right, so this is what my tank looked like before the addition of the 2 extra A500X. I've got the 4 Orfec bars on, I've got my 3 Phillips coral gears, and I've got the original 3 A360X Kessils. Now, as you can see, there's no shortage of light. In fact, I'll give you a quick par test now, just randomly across the tank and put those figures on screen. I've got par in spades and it's not really an issue there at all. What I wanted to get out of the Kessil A500X edition was a little bit more shimmer and a little bit more color in some ranges, plus just something to play with. So I'll fire them up now so you can have a look at what difference that made. All right, that's everything up now and running. I'm not sure how much of a visible notice it made on camera. It did add in person quite a bit of pop, both in just brightness and color. And I know brightness by the eye is not the way to measure things, hence why we have a par meter, but it definitely did add a little bit of extra light to the tank. And what I like about it was that I was able to put the big heavy lifting lights, the A500X, I was able to install those with no reflectors whatsoever, just to give me maximum spread. And then I was able to utilize my flexible arm mounts here for my A360X lights with some reflectors to really spotlight some bombies that I wanted to really get some corals glowing. And the best thing is I can adjust it, I can move that, I can point it at a different colony at any point in time. I can also aim them at the angles on the glass to try and get some reflections happening and get things bouncing off walls and sand like that. But here is the tank with everything powered up. If you're curious on the par values I'm getting right now, I'll put them on screen so you can see. Again, just a quick test from the left side, right side and middle from the sand, about halfway up my tank, which is near the top of my rockscape, and then just a couple of inches above the surface. I don't have a shortage of par. I do still have the lights mounted what I would consider to be very high above my aquarium, but the whole idea is to give myself maximum spread, and I feel like I've achieved that quite well. And of course, Kessil are fairly famous for their blues and the colors they bring out in new corals. So when my Phillips coral gears has gone off for the day and I've just got the 4 blue Orfec bars and then the 5 Kessils running in their bluest spectrum, you get some really nice colors popping for that sunset. And then I just let the intensity of those ramp down just so I get that real shimmery finish to the end of the day. And of course, I couldn't not give you a close-up of how the corals look under the Kessils, because particularly under the blues, you get a lot of shimmer, but you do get a huge amount of pop from your LPS, such as this gold hammer. Even the greens in this ultra-toxic green hammer absolutely glow under that very rich blue of the Kessils. But not just the LPS, even the SBS, you can see here, this little bonsai piece here. The purples and the blues are absolutely enjoying the spectrum, that is for sure. And then another color to really show, or another coral to show the contrast, I should say, is this PC rainbow, which you can see the polyps are extending nicely and the colors are nice and vibrant. All right, guys, there you have it. That is my experience with the Kessil A500x. Some parts I love, some parts I think are ridiculously overpriced for what they are. I think in the specific use case, if you had a real niche install scenario where you needed to mount the lights very far above your tank, or you need an LED with really good depth penetration and not so much foot space coverage, I think the A500x would be an awesome choice. For most other scenarios, I think there's probably a better light out there. That being said, do I regret buying them? No. You only pay for the lights once. Once you get over that initial purchase price, they're there on your tank to enjoy from here on out. And it does give me the flexibility to do some cool things with different reflectors, particularly with the flexible mounting arms that I've installed these on. I can point those Kessils as little highlights wherever I want, so I'm not wasting energy lighting up the back wall or the sand bed. I'm lighting up my corals exactly where I need them. So if that's going to suit your use case, maybe they're worth considering. Other than that, guys, I will wrap the video up there. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any other questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to pop it in the comments section down below. I do personally reply to each and every one there. Other than that, guys, till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Cheers, bye.